I thought we were celebrating Thanksgiving together, but when I arrived, my family had already left. My mother texted, "We thought you'd be late." My sister said, "We couldn't keep waiting." I walked away without looking back, but what happened next was unthinkable. I always believed Thanksgiving was a time for togetherness, for family hugs over steaming plates of turkey and endless side dishes, for laughter echoing off the walls of a warm dining room. Growing up, I'd watched my family gather each year with a predictable fervor. I was Ava, 29, a marketing coordinator by day and a hopeless romantic with a penchant for vintage coffee shop afternoons by night. I carried a quiet resilience and a stubborn streak that often got me into trouble with those who preferred to keep things as they were. My life in a small Midwestern town had been a mosaic of muted celebrations and subtle rejections. A constant reminder that I was, in many ways, always the outsider. That fateful Thanksgiving morning started with the soft chime of my alarm, the chill of early autumn creeping through my apartment window, and an overwhelming hope that today might be different. I'd spent the night preparing, choosing an outfit that made me feel both confident and comfortable. A flowy blouse, dark denim, and a pair of worn-in boots that had carried me through enough storms to count. As I sipped my coffee and scrolled through messages on my phone, one text stood out from the usual parade of Happy Thanksgiving greetings. It was from Mom. "We thought you'd be late." There was no warmth, no invitation, only a casual statement that, to my ears, reeked of resignation. I still remembered last year's gathering, the hushed tones of polite conversation, the barely concealed disappointment in the way my sister Marlene smirked whenever she mentioned her punctuality. Marlene had a way of making every moment about her. Her kids were always the center of attention, her achievements applauded even when they bordered on the trivial. I recalled a conversation from a previous Thanksgiving when she teased, "We couldn't keep waiting for you, Ava. You always drag your feet." It wasn't a harsh accusation, but it cut deep, planting seeds of self-doubt that had grown into a persistent ache. The drive to what I thought was a celebration of gratitude was filled with both nostalgia and a gnawing sense of foreboding. I passed by familiar landmarks, the old gas station where I'd spent countless afternoons after school, the park bench where I'd shared secrets with friends, and wondered if any of these memories could soften the sting of another rejection. With each mile, I felt an increasing urge to prove that I deserved more than the silent dismissal I had endured for years. Yet, an inexplicable heaviness tugged at my heart, a premonition that today might shatter the illusion of family unity I'd clung to for so long. As I neared the address, a sense of anticipation mingled with dread. I imagined the table set with autumnal abundance, the aroma of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie wafting through a cozy home, and the gentle hum of conversations that promised connection. I stepped out of my car and grabbed my bag, each step toward the house reverberating with the promise of a long-awaited reunion. But as I rounded the corner, the sight that greeted me was like a punch to the gut. An empty driveway, a silent porch, and no sign of the bustling holiday I had envisioned. In that moment, I realized that the familiar warmth I had so desperately hoped for had evaporated into a cold, hard truth. I stood on the quiet street, the early light of Thanksgiving morning casting long shadows across the lawn. The usual clamor of laughter and conversation was replaced by an eerie stillness. I fumbled with my phone, rereading the text from Mom. "We thought you'd be late." The words stung, echoing through my mind as I tried to decipher their hidden meaning. Had they really left without me, or was it some twisted family joke? My heart pounded in my chest as I dialed Marlene's number, but the call went straight to voicemail. Slowly, I walked up the steps of the house that once seemed like a beacon of family love. The door was ajar, its creak in the cool breeze resonating like a final farewell. Inside, the living room was a snapshot of a hurried exit. Half-finished conversations lingering in the air, a set table with untouched plates, and a muted television still playing a holiday special. The lingering aroma of spiced cider and roasted vegetables fought against the silence, creating a surreal atmosphere that felt both nostalgic and alien. I moved from room to room, each space whispering its own story of abrupt departure. In the dining area, a bowl of cranberries sat half empty, A centerpiece lay askew, and a scattering of napkins hinted at the chaos of a sudden exit. The meticulous decorations, once a symbol of festive cheer, now looked abandoned, like relics of a celebration that never truly happened. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages again, trying to piece together the narrative. Each text was a reminder of the times I'd been made to feel like an afterthought. Confusion and hurt warred within me as I retraced the steps of my arrival. I recalled the promising texts from friends who'd expected to see me, the warm hugs promised by relatives, and the unspoken hope that maybe this year, things would be different. Instead, the silence was deafening. It wasn't just that they hadn't waited, it was that they had decided without me. Every object in the house told a story of a family that had moved on, leaving me behind in a way that felt both calculated and indifferent. While I sat in the silent living room, memories began to surface, a montage of previous Thanksgivings where my presence had been minimized, where I'd tried to be the glue that held everyone together, only to find myself pushed aside. I remembered a Thanksgiving when I had arrived late due to a flat tire, only to be met with sighs and a barely concealed look of annoyance. I remembered the half-hearted, "Sorry you're late," and the way Marlene's eyes had sparkled with self-satisfaction when recounting her own promptness. The wounds of those days had never fully healed, and today they festered anew. In the midst of this internal storm, I felt a stirring of resolve. I wasn't just a passive victim of circumstance. This was a moment, raw and unscripted, that demanded a response. The emptiness of the house was not just a physical void. It was an indictment of a lifetime spent yearning for recognition and love that was always just out of reach. The sudden realization that I could no longer be complicit in my own invisibility took root deep within me. As I lingered in that forlorn space, my mind began to craft a narrative of retribution, of reclaiming the dignity that had been so ruthlessly denied. Later that morning, I left the empty house with a heavy heart and a mind swirling with memories. I found refuge at a nearby coffee shop, a modest, quirky place with mismatched furniture and a warm, inviting aroma of roasted beans. Settling into a corner seat, I opened my journal, a trusted confidant that had borne witness to years of silent suffering and small triumphs. I began to write, letting the flood of memories pour out in a stream of raw, unfiltered emotion. The journal pages carried the weight of my history. The times when I'd felt overlooked at birthday parties, the quiet evenings when I'd sat in the shadows while my sister basked in praise, and the moments when my own accomplishments were brushed off as insignificant. Each memory was a thread in the tapestry of my life, a tapestry that had grown more tangled with every passing Thanksgiving. I recalled a particular day when I'd spent weeks planning a surprise for the family, only for my efforts to be dismissed as overzealous. The sting of that rejection still lingered, a bitter taste that no amount of time could erase. Between sips of lukewarm coffee, I replayed a conversation from years ago when an old cousin confided in me about the unspoken rules of our family. "It's always been this way," she had said, her voice laced with resignation. "Some of us are just meant to shine, and others, well, we're just here to keep the picture complete." The words had haunted me, their truth cutting through the facade of family unity. Today's abandonment was a harsh reminder that those unspoken hierarchies had never truly been dismantled. They were merely reinforced with each holiday that passed. In that quiet corner of the coffee shop, I began to understand that my family's actions were not random, but rather the culmination of years of ingrained behavior. Every slight, every hurtful comment had contributed to the fortress of indifference they now maintained. I found myself questioning the authenticity of our bonds. Was I ever truly valued, or was I merely a placeholder, a necessary inconvenience to maintain a certain image? The more I pondered, the more I felt a surge of determination. It was clear that if I was to reclaim my identity, I needed to confront these long-held wounds head-on. A friend, Sam, happened to pass by and joined me for a chat. He had always been a beacon of unwavering support, his blunt honesty cutting through the fog of my despair. "Ava," he said gently, "you deserve better than to be treated like an afterthought. Maybe it's time you stop waiting for validation from people who never really cared." His words resonated with the unspoken truth in my heart. In that moment, I realized that every painful memory was also a call to action, a demand to rewrite the narrative that had bound me for so long. That day, as the coffee shop filled with the hum of quiet conversations and clinking cups, I resolved that I would no longer be a victim of my own past. I would dig deeper into the reasons behind my family's behavior, unraveling the complex web of favoritism, resentment, and unspoken expectations that had defined our interactions. With every word I wrote in my journal, a sense of clarity emerged, a blueprint for the confrontation that lay ahead. It was time to face the ghosts of previous Thanksgivings, to challenge the legacy of indifference, and, most importantly, to reclaim the power that had always been rightfully mine. Armed with a newfound resolve, I decided to visit a place that had long been a repository of family memories, a small, rustic community center where our family had once gathered for holiday celebrations. The building, with its faded red bricks and a wraparound porch, held echoes of laughter and whispered secrets. Stepping inside, I was struck by the stark contrast between the vibrant gatherings of the past and the current state of neglect. The main hall was empty. Chairs scattered about in disarray, and a lone table set for a feast stood abandoned. It was as if the house had been frozen in time at the very moment of departure. Every corner of the center told its own story. In one room, I found remnants of a hastily left lunch, a half-eaten slice of pie, a forgotten fork on a table that once buzzed with conversation. In another, I discovered a bulletin board cluttered with outdated event flyers and family photos that captured happier times. Each artifact deepened the sense of betrayal I felt. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't an accident. The decision to leave had been deliberate, a calculated move designed to reinforce a hierarchy that excluded me. As I wandered through the empty halls, I began to piece together clues left behind by those who had departed. A half-finished voicemail on a landline phone, a scribbled note tucked into a family calendar. Each detail was a silent testament to a long-standing pattern of favoritism and neglect. I even overheard fragments of a conversation between two staff members in the back room, discussing the sudden change in plans with an air of resignation. Their words, though hushed, confirmed what I had feared. My family had made a conscious choice to move on without me. The deeper I delved into the abandoned remnants of our gatherings, the more I felt a mixture of anger and sorrow. It wasn't merely that they had left, it was that they had done so without a hint of remorse or explanation. Every new detail I uncovered was a fresh wound, yet also a spark that ignited a fierce determination within me. I realized that if I was to ever understand why I'd been cast aside, I needed to confront the system of favoritism that had governed our family for decades. In a quiet moment of introspection, I sat on a creaking bench outside the community center and allowed myself to process the overwhelming cascade of emotions. I thought of all the times I'd arrived to a celebration with hope in my eyes, only to be met with cold shoulders and dismissive texts. I recalled the carefully curated moments when my presence was acknowledged only as a formality, a token gesture in an otherwise exclusive family portrait. The pain was raw and real, but so too was the determination to chart a new course. I vowed to unearth every hidden truth, every subtle injustice that had led to this moment, and to use that knowledge as a weapon against the oppressive cycle of exclusion. That evening, as twilight draped the town in a melancholy hue, I sought solace in a nearby park, a place that had always been my refuge in times of turmoil. The crisp air and rustling leaves provided a quiet backdrop for the storm raging inside me. I strolled along the winding paths, each step echoing with the memories of past gatherings, each breath a mix of regret and resolve. In a secluded corner of the park, I found a small bench beneath a towering oak tree, its branches a silent witness to years of quiet suffering and newfound defiance. Sitting there, I replayed every detail of the morning, the abandoned house, the empty community center, and the biting realization that my family had orchestrated their departure without me. But rather than succumbing to despair, I began to see the threads of a larger narrative forming. It wasn't just about being left behind. It was about reclaiming the identity I had long been forced to suppress. The more I reflected, the more I realized that I had a choice: to remain a silent victim or to rise, armed with the truth of my own worth. In that solitary moment, I resolved that I would no longer allow my family's actions to define me. I would confront the legacy of favoritism head-on and, if necessary, sever the ties that bound me to a past filled with neglect. I reached into my bag and pulled out my journal, flipping to a blank page as if it were an invitation to start a new chapter. With deliberate strokes, I began to outline my plan, a blueprint for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of our family dynamics. I resolved to gather every piece of evidence, every painful memory, and to use them not as weapons of revenge, but as tools for liberation. I would show the world, and more importantly, myself, that I was not the perpetual afterthought. I was a force to be reckoned with, ready to claim the future that was rightfully mine. By the time the park lights flickered on and the chill deepened, I had made a decision. I would not return to the hollow shell of a Thanksgiving that had become a symbol of my lifelong exclusion. Instead, I would take my hard-earned dignity and transform it into a promise of new beginnings. The defining choice was made. I was done waiting for validation from those who had never truly seen me. I would walk away from the ghosts of my past and into a future where my voice would be heard, where my worth would be recognized, and where the unthinkable, my complete transformation, would finally begin. I returned to my small apartment with a turbulent mix of emotions, a cocktail of anger, sorrow, and a fierce determination that pulsed through every fiber of my being. The silence of the empty house had morphed into an internal cacophony of unresolved questions. Unable to contain the rising tide of frustration, I dialed my mother's number again. This time, however, I wasn't prepared for the cold, clipped responses that greeted me. Her voicemail was sparse, void of any remorse or explanation. A quick text from Marlene followed, its tone as dismissive as ever. We couldn't keep waiting. The words were final, their impact reverberating through my soul. I decided then that no more passive suffering was allowed. I gathered every ounce of courage and organized a virtual family meeting, a video call that would force a confrontation with the people who had abandoned me. I sent out the invites, each notification a silent challenge to the status quo. When the call connected, the screen was filled with faces I once considered family. My mother's icy gaze, Marlene's defensive smirk, and a couple of distant relatives who looked uncomfortable and guilty. I greeted them with a calm that belied the storm raging inside me. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice steady yet laced with raw emotion. "I'm here because I deserve to know why you left me behind today." There was a moment of stunned silence as the screen flickered with awkward glances and forced expressions. My mother's eyes narrowed, and Marlene's lips tightened. What followed was an exchange that was equal parts bitter confession and blistering indictment. A verbal battleground where years of pent-up grievances were laid bare. In that digital arena, each word felt like a dagger. I recounted the countless occasions when I had arrived to a celebration with hope in my eyes, only to be met with indifference. I spoke of the text messages that had become emblematic of my exclusion, the moments when my accomplishments were belittled, and the ways in which my very presence seemed to disrupt a carefully maintained family hierarchy. With each sentence, the room grew more charged, the digital divide shrinking under the weight of our shared history. The conversation quickly escalated into a maelstrom of accusations and half-truths. My mother defended her actions with a cold rationality that left me reeling. "It was just a misunderstanding," she claimed, her voice flat and devoid of any genuine concern. Marlene interjected with defensive quips, trying to justify their behavior as nothing more than practicality. "We have our own lives," she sneered, "and sometimes plans change." But as I pressed further, demanding the full story behind their calculated abandonment, the veneer of normalcy began to crumble. In the midst of the heated dialogue, a twist emerged, a revelation that no one had anticipated. A distant cousin whom I had seldom heard from confessed over the call that she had long harbored doubts about the family's dynamics. She spoke of secret meetings and whispered conversations where it was made clear that I was viewed as an inconvenience, a reminder of imperfections that needed to be excised for the sake of preserving a pristine image. The truth, once exposed, was more devastating than I could have imagined. Years of favoritism, of carefully orchestrated family events that excluded me, had been deliberate. My silence, which I had mistaken for acceptance, was nothing more than compliance with an unspoken rule. Anger surged through me as I demanded accountability. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to be erased?" I shouted, tears mingling with fury as I looked into the camera. The faces on the screen wavered between shock and defiance. For the first time, my family was forced to confront not just the act of leaving, but the deeper, more painful history that had led to this moment. Every revelation was a blow, a reminder of broken promises, of love diluted by ambition and convenience. In the chaos of the exchange, a peculiar sense of clarity emerged. I realized that this confrontation was not solely about seeking an apology or an explanation. It was about reclaiming my identity, about exposing the injustice that had defined my entire existence. As voices rose and fell, each participant laid bare their own wounds and secrets, and I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The truth, brutal and unvarnished, was a stepping stone toward the liberation I so desperately needed. As the call descended into a swirl of accusations and bitter admissions, I reached a pivotal moment, a crossroads where I had to decide whether to continue pleading for validation or to embrace my own self-worth unequivocally. With every word exchanged, I felt the chains of my past loosen, the ties that had bound me to a cycle of exclusion and silent suffering unraveling before my eyes. I took a deep breath and, with trembling resolve, declared, "I'm done. I refuse to be a ghost in my own family any longer." The declaration was met with stunned silence. For a heartbeat, time seemed to suspend itself as the gravity of my words sank in. I gathered my digital belongings, a folder of cherished photos, scanned copies of old letters, and the digital archive of my journal entries that chronicled years of pain and hope and informed everyone on the call that I would be stepping away from this call, from this life that had never truly seen me. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment reaction, but the culmination of decades of quiet torment and unfulfilled dreams. In that moment, I realized that walking away was not an act of surrender, but a declaration of independence. I ended the call with a final, resolute message. "This is the end of my submission to a life that never recognized my worth. I'm leaving, and I'm taking every bit of my story with me." As I clicked hang up, a profound stillness fell over me. A silence that was not empty, but brimming with the promise of a new beginning. My heart pounded with a mix of grief and exhilaration, and I felt, for the first time in years, that I was truly free. In the aftermath of the call, I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, surrounded by the echoes of shattered illusions and the quiet hum of a life that had just been irreversibly altered. I stared at the screen of my laptop, the image of my severed connection lingering like a ghost. The rush of emotions was overwhelming, a torrent of regret, relief, and a nascent hope that whispered of uncharted possibilities. I recalled every painful memory that had led to this moment, every tear shed in silence, and I allowed myself to feel the full spectrum of emotions without judgment. I knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, reconciling with the loss of the only family I had ever known, navigating a future without their constant presence, and learning to trust my own voice after years of being silenced. Yet, in that crucible of raw emotion, I discovered an inner strength that I never knew existed. I resolved to rebuild my identity from the shattered remnants of the past, to forge new relationships founded on genuine care rather than convenience. With trembling hands, I opened my journal once more and began to write, a final farewell to the old life and a manifesto for the new. I wrote of the pain, the betrayal, and the bittersweet liberation that accompanied my decision. Each word was a testament to my resilience, a pledge to never allow anyone to diminish my worth again. In the quiet solitude of that night, I felt an unfamiliar sensation. Hope. As the hours passed and the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, I knew that I had reached a turning point. The unthinkable had happened. I had reclaimed my narrative. The decision to walk away was not an act of defeat, but a bold declaration that I would no longer be defined by a family that refused to see me. And though the future was uncertain, I was finally ready to step forward into a life where my voice would echo with strength, and my worth would be measured not by others, but by the truth I had long guarded within. In the soft light of a new day, I woke in a modest motel room that had become my sanctuary. a temporary haven where I could begin the slow process of healing. The night's turmoil had given way to a reflective calm. I sat by the window with a steaming mug of tea, watching as the world outside stirred to life. The silence of the room was gentle, almost comforting, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the previous day's events. I flipped through my journal, rereading the raw words that had marked my emancipation, and felt a sense of pride for having taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. That morning, I reached out to old friends and mentors who had always believed in me, those who had seen beyond the facade of family dysfunction. Their encouragement was a balm, a reminder that my worth was not defined by the neglect of others, but by the strength I possessed. I spent hours talking on the phone, planning small outings, and even considering therapy as a way to navigate the complex emotions that now surged within me. Each conversation, each shared laugh, was a stitch in the new fabric of my identity, one woven from resilience, self-love, and the promise of uncharted beginnings. As days turned into weeks, I embarked on the journey of rediscovering who I was beyond the confines of an unsupportive family. I enrolled in creative writing classes at a local community college, eager to channel my emotions into art and stories that could inspire others. I reconnected with my love for photography, spending afternoons capturing the beauty of the changing seasons in my town. These small acts of self-care and creativity filled the void left by my family's absence, gradually piecing together a new narrative that belonged solely to me. I began setting clear boundaries with anyone who sought to draw me back into the old dynamics. I learned to say no without guilt, to prioritize my mental and emotional well-being over the toxic expectations of a family that had long taken me for granted. Each step, no matter how tentative, was a triumph over the inertia of years spent in self-doubt. I discovered a newfound confidence in my decisions and a fierce determination to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. In doing so, I realized that my journey was not just about walking away. It was about moving forward into a future where I was the author of my own destiny. On a crisp autumn afternoon, several months later, I found myself sitting on a park bench beneath the same towering oak tree where I had once wrestled with my darkest thoughts. The leaves, painted in hues of gold and crimson, danced in the gentle breeze, a reminder that even in the cycle of loss, there is beauty and renewal. I took out my journal and wrote a final reflection, a closing note to the chapter that had defined my past and an open invitation to the future. I wrote about the painful truth of my family's abandonment, but more importantly, I wrote about the liberation that had come from embracing that truth. I acknowledged the wounds that would always remain, yet celebrated the strength that had allowed me to transform them into a source of empowerment. My words flowed with gratitude for the unexpected allies I'd found along the way. Friends, mentors, and even strangers who had shown me kindness when I needed it most. The journey was far from over. I knew that healing was a continuous process, that the scars of rejection might resurface from time to time. But now I was armed with a clarity of purpose, a vision of a life where I was no longer a ghost in my own story. I had learned that sometimes the unthinkable act of walking away is the catalyst for a profound transformation. As I closed my journal, I felt an unyielding certainty that the future held endless possibilities, and that I, at long last, was ready to embrace them with an open heart. Standing up from that bench, I took one last look at the horizon, where the sun dipped low in a blaze of orange and purple. I smiled softly, a quiet acknowledgement that I had survived the darkness and emerged stronger. With every step I took away from that park, I carried with me the lessons of the past, a tapestry of pain and resilience, woven into the fabric of who I was and who I would become. The unthinkable had happened, and in its wake, a new life had begun, one where I was free to write my own story, free to love, and free to be unapologetically me.